by popular demand. Episode 2 of many. Crew Call. And it's always great to see the crew. Jacko back in the B-Lo. Leo down in FLA. Sherms, Terms, doing well. E. Smith, happy birthday to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And
happy birthday,
Jonesy,
E.
My man has come up with a theme song. Now, he's not going to give it all to us right now, but he's going to give us just a little taste of this Brady Bunch funk that he's got going on.
Well, somebody made a comment about us being in boxes like Brady Bunch. I don't know if you would be. Was it Mike Brady? Was he the guy, the Rob Brady? I don't know.
Been too long, Jonesy.
But it's
sing the song, man.
Brady was the oldest.
The crew call.
Okay,
hold on. I gotta look for it. I gotta look for it. I mean, like my creative juices. It's the crew call of a Raptors broadcast. Because of quarantine, they were stuck on their own. That's it. Everybody's going to get a line. That's the teaser.
We can't wait for that. That might be episode 3, 4, 5, or never. We're waiting.
Well, when we do the promo, and everybody has to sing a line, we'll see how that goes.
Jonesy,
a little teaser.
Jonesy, the dogs in my neighborhood are all howling right now.
Mine too, Jack.
Hey, real quick, at the top of the show, we always want to say thank you to everyone on the front lines, all of the healthcare workers out there. So
yes.
Join me in thanking everybody, right? We do deeply appreciate it. What you guys are doing certainly is saving lives. And everybody at home, continue to social distance and wash your hands and everything that you continue to hear on a daily basis. This is going to bring us to Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Before we get there, Leo, I want to go back to Game 1 and Game 2. When you go back to Game 1, it's interesting. I remember leaving the building that night. Although the Raptors ran out of gas in the fourth, I felt that they were the best team in the series. They lost that game. And then, Leo, you go to Game 2, and to me it was the outlier game. And there's a couple of different themes in that game, one of which happened in the post-game presser, specifically Marc Gasol blaming himself. That was on me. And then also Kawhi Leonard. That was the other piece to that, where he famously said, when asked, where are you going? He said, I'm going back to Toronto for Game 3. So just your impressions as the Raptors are down 0-2 in the series as they get set to take on Milwaukee for Game 3.
I love it when my partner sets me up after he's already done the whole thing. You are amazing, my man.
You should be used to that by now, Leo.
Okay, so listen, on Game 1, here was my take. As you said, Raptors won that game. They were the best team the whole game, except for the very end. Milwaukee goes on a 10-0 run. But here's the catch. You got Brook Lopez, 13 points in the fourth quarter, career high 29. That's not happening again. Okay, forget that one. All right? And then you look at Mike Budenholzer. He said something I thought was kind of prophetic. He says, as long as we stay the course and do what we do, we're going to be okay. And what did he do all series long? He just stayed the course. Make any adjustments. And then when you go to Game 2, that's one of those, hey, as you said, you toss that one out, it's done. And I loved what Kawhi said. I mean, he's got that way about him, but just to go, where's Toronto going to go now? Game 3, Toronto. I mean, come on. You can ask me any question you want. The reality is we're just going to go back and play the game. And the whole team, people laughed at that, and I think it's the way Kawhi does it. It is funny. Yet at the same time, you're answering a lot of dumb questions. What are you going to do? You're going to go back and take care of business. And that's what they did.
The thing that really jumps out at me when you look back on it now is, and you see it even this year, the resiliency of this club and the toughness of this team. And when I look at the Raptors going into Game 3 and how they ended up winning the game in double overtime, and you look at what took place the first 2 games in Milwaukee, this was a team that just somehow, some way, and it's been that way for years now, they just find a way to dig in and do what needs to be done. And the bottom line is they didn't allow what took place in Milwaukee to impact them. They came out determined, and somehow, some way, they got it done. Sherm, I thought it was a remarkable performance considering they were in big trouble going into Game 3.
Yeah, well, you're right, Jack, and you hit a word on the head with resiliency. I mean, this group showed throughout the season and through the playoffs how resilient they really were. And you guys talk about Game 1. You know, I remember walking out the arena thinking that Milwaukee just stole a home game from the Raptors. And it was interesting because the Raptors were very confident walking off the floor that they knew they let one slip. Game 2, we've seen those type of games throughout the playoffs where a team just gets going and it's a different outcome. But Game 3 was so important. You think about the odds against the Raptors going down 0-3 in the series. You think about going to overtime in a situation in the fourth quarter where you had a 5-point lead with a little over a minute left, and you gave up that lead and had to go to overtime 2 times to get the job done. And they bent, but they never broke. And I just thought they did a great job in terms of fighting through every reason to give that series away to get themselves out of that series.
Sherm, it was interesting because I remember walking out of the arena with you, and I remember that line. Milwaukee stole a home game. The Raptors were up the entire time, and normally it's the road team that is kind of hanging on and lean somebody out at the end. And like I look back, and there were 2 huge efforts by Kawhi Leonard and Kyle Lowry that, well, almost went to waste. They both carried that team, and then when I fast forward to Game 3, it was almost the same thing in reverse. As you said, the Raptors had the lead. They had a double-figure lead at points in the game, and Milwaukee just kept kind of hanging around. And then, I mean, you're looking at the end of that game where Milwaukee ties it, and at one point, Middleton has a look for 3 to give them a lead with under 10 seconds to go, and it doesn't go. And then, you know, to your point about the resiliency, and we all know that the Raptors won 4 straight in that series. But I don't think this team ever looked at it as winning 4 straight. I think from, you know, what we know of them, it was 1 game 4 times, with Kawhi Leonard saying, well, we're going back to Toronto for Game 3. They got Game 3. Done. Let's concentrate on Game 4. Got it. Now people are like, well, Milwaukee hasn't lost 3 in a row all year. Well, it doesn't matter. It's 1 game the next game, and Toronto goes in and steals it. And then by that time, I just think Milwaukee is as you said, Leo, Budenholzer didn't adjust, and Milwaukee was mentally, I think they were cooked as much as anything else.
Eric, let's take a deep dive into Game 3 and leading up into that, because as we know, down 0-2, a lot of pressures from the exterior, everybody saying that Milwaukee is, you know, too good. They're going to run away with this. Raptors, though, in 2016 had been in this spot before, as we recall in the Eastern Conference Finals with the Cleveland Cavaliers down 0-2, and they end up obviously battling back in that series. When you look at Toronto heading into Game 3, and when that ball went up, there was conversations about, do you stick with the starters? Do you change different things? What was your takeaway?
You know, I think it was the fact that this team, you know, kind of to everybody's point to this point, Matty, is that there was still a confidence, even in being down 0-2. It was a confidence of a team that knew that they were heading on to their home floor. They knew how good they've been on their home floor. And I don't think that they felt that they were overwhelmed in this series in spite of the 0-2 hole. So it was kind of, a calmness, I think, around the team. There was no panic within the locker room, around practice, with the players, with the coaching staff. And I think they showed that when they came out of the gates and they built up that early lead, and they were up 11 points, and they consistently, kept punching back in that first quarter, in that first half. Anytime Milwaukee made that run and tried to get themselves back in, there was another bucket coming. There was another time where you stretch it to 7, you stretch it 8, you get it back into double figures. And I guess that speaks to what Sherm was mentioning, the resiliency that they continued to show, I'd say early on, to maintain that lead. And then ultimately the resiliency that came in the second half when they had to battle themselves back, when they had to overcome some of the odds to ultimately get this thing. So I just think that what we saw in Game 3 perhaps was a microcosm of what we saw throughout the season and throughout the postseason run, is how this team stuck together. They didn't talk about the past, pro or con. They didn't even talk about the regular season a ton, pro or con. It was, we're living in the moment, and we believe in the 12 to 15 guys in this locker room, and they weren't listening to the noise of Raptor teams gone by or Toronto history and things that have plagued the Raptors in the past and whatever else. They're saying, no, we are different, and we're going to go out there and prove it.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with respect to staying in the moment. I think that this team did that probably better than any team that I've been around for a long time. Leo, specifically, when we go inside this game, I think Marc Gasol and the way he performed after saying in game 2 afterwards, hey, it's on me. We know it wasn't just on him in game 2, but how he performed in game 3 was huge.
Yeah, I mean, Marc Gasol, you think about it, game 3 really set the tone for the entire NBA on how to play Giannis, right? It was that game where instead of the old thing where, okay, you got playing a guy that's not that good a shooter, you give him space. But if you give Giannis space, allow him to get up the floor, he's going to kill you, right? He's going to keep attacking. And Marc Gasol, along with the effort, the entire game and everything he did, I thought was exceptional. There were times when Giannis is crossing half court. Gasol's right there. He's right there to slow him down, and then he can switch off or hold him, whatever he's got to do. But, that effort to me and the way the Raptors played Giannis Antetokounmpo in that game 3, I think really changed the series and changed the way the NBA looks at how to play him.
I think when you look at Milwaukee, there's a few things that you have to do. Number one, offensively, you got to take care of the ball. And number 2, you got to shoot the ball pretty solid. Take good shots, and then that gets you to a point where now you can slow them down. I think when you look at the Bucks last year, you look at the Bucks now, when they're a free-flowing team and they're able to get the ball up the court quickly and that ball just pops around quick, they're a tough team to catch up with. And I think the Raptors did a good job on their end offensively, and then meeting them earlier in the court in terms of slowing them down and a higher degree of physicality. I really thought that made a big difference, Jonesy.
Well, they held them to 37%, Jack. And people, when you're watching this game, remember, Kyle Lowry fouls out with
6 minutes,
7 minutes to go or something like that. I don't remember the exact, but they played half of the fourth quarter and 2 overtimes without one of their best players, without one of their leaders. And I thought Kawhi Leonard was huge, obviously, in that game. But, Jack, you and I were doing that game, and I remember at one point where they were making a pass late in the second overtime and Giannis had fouled out by that time from the wing to the top, and Kawhi got a piece of it, and I think it was Brogdon that was pursuing it, and then Kawhi got another piece of it to knock it away, and just it kind of, to me, embodied the will of the team and the way he led them with, this thing is never over. Just don't panic. Just continue to play. And I just thought with Kyle getting a rest, and then they were going to come back game 4 with that momentum behind them, and with everything that had gone on in the first 3 games, you're down 2-1. Everybody just held serve. That game to me stands out. Some of the stuff towards the end, the late in the fourth quarter, and Kawhi Leonard. And I think it was in that game too, fellas, where we saw Fred VanVleet start to get off the mat and make some shots too, because he'd been having a tough time throughout the entire playoffs.
Sherm, it's also the emergence of playoff Pal as well, right? The reemergence, really, we had so much fun. We've seen this so many times, right, in playoffs past, where Norm just has these big-time performances, and here it is, as Jonesy just mentioned, Fred VanVleet, Norm in that Philly series, and now all of a sudden, when you need them most, here they come.
Well, you're right, Matt. And you think about it, in that game, Giannis only had 12 points. He had 23 rebounds, but he only had 12 points. And the bench, in terms of Malcolm Brogdon and George Hill, were excellent in that game. They did a great job scoring the basketball. I think George Hill had 24 points and Brogdon had 17. But Norm's start in the first half was excellent, coming off the bench, doing what he did and providing a lot of punch. And we've seen Serge in Game 7 against Philadelphia was the underlying story amongst the shot. Well, I thought Norm had a big impact on that Game 3 ending based on the way that he started the game. You guys talk about, the way, Leo, you're talking about the way to defend a Kawhi Leonard. Well, a Giannis Antetokounmpo. Well, you need a Kawhi Leonard, too, to get the job done. And Kawhi, this was the first time we really saw Kawhi locked in on Giannis. and really get into him. And we saw he can really turn elite players into sometimes average players during the course of a 48-minute game from a defensive perspective, and he can still give you 30 points. So we were seeing the greatness of Kawhi, and then you see the Marc Gasol build into the background in terms of the help and the team's defense overall. And the reason why Milwaukee's so good, as you mentioned, Jack, at shooting the ball and spreading you out, is because they have a catalyst like Giannis who attracts so much attention. You take that away, you limit that, all of a sudden those shooters don't get those looks. And that, to me, was a dynamic that really changed for the Raptors. Kawhi on Giannis doing what he did, the team built behind him. They took him out of transition. He only scored 12 points. 6 of them came in the fourth quarter. And then Pascal driving to the basket in that first overtime and fouling Giannis out when he tried to draw the charge was huge for the Raptors.
E. Smith, it's interesting, just mentioned Pascal. And you think back to Pascal with the free throw, he misses it oh gosh. But he's able to redeem himself, right? As Sherm just mentioned.
I think the fact that just shows his growth as a young player as well. The fact that he was able to gather himself, Matty, and to have the overtime that he did, to ultimately finish, with the double-double. I think it was 24 and 11, and to be, in that same spot in the overtime, in the double overtime session, back at the line, essentially icing the game. And I thought his aggressiveness overall, before Giannis also had fouled out of the ball game, going down in the post and taking it to the front line time and time again, and battling against whether it be Antetokounmpo or Lopez, whomever was down there. I thought Pascal was as equally important before ultimately Kawhi took over in that overtime session. And the fact that the Raptors' size within their front line with Ibaka, with Siakam, with Gasol, let alone, as Sherm says, with then Kawhi battling down low, I think just defensively, the way that they stuck to it and really battled down low against the Bucks, that was, to me, the biggest difference. Because, the other thing we haven't talked about, I guess, in all this is, Jonesy mentioned Van Vliet. He only had one shot, one 3-ball, and it was late fourth quarter in that game.
Yeah.
Danny Green, one field goal made. There were so many things to overcome. Again, the bench seemingly struggling overall. And as we talked about Lowry fouling out, it was really just relying upon, yet again, the team effort overall of everybody's got to step up. And it started and ended with, I think, Kawhi and Pascal being that 1-2 punch.
And if memory serves me right, and I could be wrong here, I think they were coming out of a timeout, and Nick Nurse dialed up that Fred VanVleet 3.
Yes.
Even though he had struggled, right?
And it came at a point, too, where the Raptors had gone scoreless, I believe, for 5+ minutes, or had one field goal in 5+ minutes, but were scoreless for almost 4. And then VanVleet hits that shot and actually broke a tie to put Toronto up 3. So just those moments from even guys that weren't playing well, they're still making an impact. Even as I mentioned, Danny Green, only one field goal in the game, but he had the block that could have ultimately saved the game on Middleton before Middleton, to his credit, stuck with the play, got the ball back, tied it. But, all those little things of just battling through, even when you're struggling statistically, finding other ways to impact the game.
And that's not unusual, guys, for Nick Nurse to do that, to draw up a play for a guy who's not shooting the ball particularly well. If we remember the season before, Pascal had a last possession play against the Phoenix Suns in the regular season where he wasn't shooting well, but Nick drew up a play for him. We saw it this season early with Norm Powell, where Nick gave him the ball early and have him just to experience that situation. So it's not unusual for Nick to give a guy that opportunity, even though he's not playing statistically the best kind of game.
The thing that I remember most, Matty, about that 3 that you guys were talking about was the crowd reaction to Fred finally hitting a shot. You go back and you look at the highlights, the way, the crowd was off the chart. They were turned up the whole time, but the reaction to Fred's bucket in particular was really something else.
There were 2 games that I thought that Milwaukee cracked a little bit. And this game, when they walked out of the building after game 3, I think they know that was a game they could have had and they didn't get. And the Raptors found a way in double overtime, to their credit, to win it. And then obviously, as we know, in game 5, Kawhi Leonard took their heart from them in Milwaukee, and Fred VanVleet was spectacular as well shooting the ball. But I think when you look at the 2 moments in this series where they opened up the door and allowed Toronto, and Toronto came bursting in and said, you know what, we're going to be the better team here. I think the first time was in game 3 when the resiliency and the toughness, you could see the Bucks, when they walked off the court that night, they were not winning game 4. They were just not going to win game 4. You could see that they were like, oh boy, we got a series on our hands now.
We could spend probably 30, 40 minutes talking about one player in particular, career high 52 minutes. We have about 7 minutes left here in episode 2 of Crew Call. Leo, career best 52 minutes for Kawhi Leonard, noticeably on the court, hobbling. You just, to me, as much as Game 7, and it will always be a defining moment, boy, in the middle of a series, this one was as good as it gets for Kawhi Leonard.
There's no question, Matt. If you had to pick, say, 2 games in that entire playoff run that really were difference makers, the Game 7 and I think the Game 3 against Milwaukee. So, and think about what Kawhi did. Yeah, he scored. But when I look back, as you said, this is a guy that's hobbling. He's playing 52 minutes, and you could tell Pascal missing those free throws. He knew what's at stake here with his buddy and the minutes he's got to play. Everybody knew that. And I was just literally in awe watching Kawhi. He had some defensive plays, some offensive rebounds where he's just going to get the ball. That's it. Late in the game, he's somehow going to get the ball and score. And that will that he played with, and on one leg for half of that, I was literally just watching that and just going, you got to be kidding.
I think Kawhi Leonard had so many defining moments, and that was one of them. As Leo mentioned, the 52-minute game. Game 4 at Philly when you're stuck 2-1 and you got to win. As we talked about a lot, Game 7 against Philly. And then coming up in this series as well in Game 5, the guy was just masterful. And just the grit, the toughness. And the bottom line is this. That's why you traded for him. Because in moments like that, the defining moments in a series where the personality of a series and could tip either way, he every time was in the middle of it tipping.
I would say this to Jack's point, and I look at Leo and Sherman. You've been on the court with a guy when you're in a game that's like back and forth and it can go either way, and you look at a guy on your team, or in your case, Leo or Sherman, maybe you are that guy on the team that other guys look at and say, man, this guy's bringing it. This guy does not want to lose. And I look at Kawhi Leonard so many times during the run. Jack, that Game 3 in Philly or Game 4 in Philly stands out. And this Game 3, as I said, playing the fourth quarter, the majority of the fourth quarter without Kyle, like that to me stands out. And he was hobbling, and it's like, you know what? I'm not about excuses. We're getting this done. And I thought Kawhi Leonard was brilliant in that game.
Jonesy, to that point, I would say this. Of the 36 points, 8 of his 36 came in second overtime. Playing 50-plus minutes, playing on one leg, scoring 8 of the 36. He wasn't going to let the team loose. I mean, he was willing that team to victory, doing it on both ends, as Sherm talked about earlier. Bringing it defensively, but bringing just as much offensively. He truly put the team on his back, I think, and carried them ultimately to that win, and there was no way that he was going to let that team walk out of the arena without picking up that win.
To me, there were times where Kawhi looked like he was operating independent of anybody else in the arena. He was just doing that he knew he could do. Nobody else understood it, and his teammates watched and supported it and helped him when necessary. But Kawhi was going to do things that was independent of whatever was going on in the game. And that was his greatness, especially in those moments that all you guys have talked about. He did things that nobody else on the floor could do. And he did it at the most important junctures of the game. And to me, that's what separated Kawhi. You put him on Jimmy Butler, he stifles him. You put him on Giannis Antetokounmpo, Giannis slows down. That's what greatness does. And Kawhi continued to make us just be in awe of his performance. And I thought that he got better as the playoffs went on, even though he seemed like his body was hurting more towards the playoffs run.
Great episode 2, Crew Call. Look at behind everybody. I got some books. Leo, obviously, in the sunshine. E. Smith at home. Sherm at home. Jonesy, he's got some bottles back there behind him.
They've never been cracked open, right?
You're just waiting for all this to end. Jack's going to come over. Speaking of Jack, what does he have? The Canadian Screen Awards right behind him, right? Jacko with the Canadian Screen Awards. There they are.
My son is in the basement taking class. I normally do the show in the basement, but he's doing college classes online. So I'm in the living room.
Game 4 coming up next. Jack even mentioned, obviously, leading into Game 4, the thoughts there. Leo, a little preview for game number 4. Raptors down 2-1. What do you have for us?
Hey, you got Kawhi, and you got this team stepping up. And like I said, you got a team that from this point on, the Raptors are closing this thing, right? And you look at the way that they play every single game. And, Jonesy's already said it. Everybody's talked about it. It's one game at a time. And the way they approach it, to me, it's just a fun team to watch. To go back and look at it and see the way they do it each single game, the way they break it down, to me, there's very few teams that have that kind of focus and can lock in like that. And it's one of the most impressive qualities of this team.
Thank you to everybody out there. Appreciate it. Game 3, it is a thriller. And, of course, we'll be back talking about Game 4.